Next, we will talk about aligning IEPs to grade level and writing annual goals and objectives. This may be challenging for many of you. I know it was for me as a classroom teacher, especially if you're used to thinking about what learners can't do instead of what they can do. Earlier in this training, you learned about the least dangerous assumption and the importance of having high expectations for your students. For the next few minutes, I want you to let go of that unhelpful developmental model, the one that says students aren't ready and can't learn, and presume that your students can learn if given quality instruction. So what exactly is alignment? What are we talking about? Well, first let's look at the individual components of alignment, and then we'll consider how they relate to each other. For us who teach students with extensive support needs, the general curriculum are the extended content standards that are linked to the general curriculum standards. Instruction is a combination of prioritized, grade-aligned academic goals, as well as life skills, communication, and therapy goals. The assessment is the Extend 1, an alternate assessment based on alternate achievement standards. The Extend 1 assesses learners on the extended content standards for their grade. So for students to show what they know on the assessment, they need quality instruction on this content. You wouldn't expect to do well on a driver's test if you never practiced parallel parking. And it's the same for our students. Your instruction must be grade aligned so that they can demonstrate what they know on the assessment. Also, when planning students' IEPs, focus on the priorities. What is most important for the student to learn now and in the future? There are many important things students need to learn, but they don't all belong on the IEP. In other words, everything you teach students will not be on the IEP. The IEP creates access to the general education curriculum, but it is not a curriculum itself. Now let's look at the steps for aligning IEPs to grade level. Let's begin by using a student-centered approach. A student-centered approach identifies the student's preferences. You can talk with the parents and students to identify their priorities, and you can determine how the student will participate in the IEP planning process. They can help write their goals, they can participate in the IEP meeting, and they can lead the IEP meeting as they get older. Think about it this way. Let's keep the I in the IEP. The student will tell you what they like, they will show you what they like, you will observe their patterns of preferences, and their parents can tell you what they like. Next to their families, you are the person who knows the students best. You can use this knowledge to build student preferences into the IEP goals. For example, here is Kevin, who always enjoys hands-on science experiments, especially if there's a surprise reaction. Now, the goal that his teacher writes for him is that Kevin will develop and display a science experiment. And his objectives can use his love of science to help him reach that goal. For example, his teacher wrote that Kevin will learn the steps of the inquiry process. That's a good goal. And another goal is that Kevin will try multiple experiments and select one to master. I really like that goal because it incorporates Kevin's choice making into the goal. And the last goal she wrote is that Kevin will develop and display his experiment at the school science fair. That's a terrific goal as well, because that's where his peers are going to be. Another step to consider is the grade level standards themselves. You can locate your state's grade level standards online, typically, as is North Carolina's. This is the link to North Carolina's extended content standards. You can identify the most important standards with general educators on your team, and you can make a list of the related skills needed for these priority standards. When we think about aligning our short-term objectives to the extended standards, three things are important to consider. the content, the context, and the performance required. Let me show you what I mean with this example. First, we have the grade level general education state standard. This one is from the 6th grade, and it describes what students should know and be able to do at the end of the 6th grade. In this case, the state standard 6E11 states that students should be able to summarize the structure of the Earth, including the layers, the mantle, and the core, based on the relative position, composition, and density. Next, we have the extended standard that's linked to the state standard but less complex. In this example, the extended standard reads that students will be able to identify the Earth's land features, including mountains, valleys, volcanoes, and islands. Now, there are 3 pieces to this standard: the context, the content, and the performance. The context is science or ELA class. It could be a virtual field trip. It could be life experience. All right? The content is land features of the Earth, and the performance requires the student to identify. Now, the teacher has written an objective. In this instance, it states that Camilla will activate a switch to listen to a science story about land features. All right? Now, I want you to consider with me, is the context is it aligned to the context of the extended standard? Remember, we said the context was science and ELA class, a virtual field trip, or life experience. What do you think? If Camilla is activating a switch to listen to a science story about land features, is the context aligned? Are they similar? Well, I'm going to say no, because in reading the objective, I don't get the sense that Camilla is in science or ELA class or on a virtual field trip or having a life experience. She could activate a switch anywhere, right? Right. So in this case, the context is not aligned. That can be a problem. All right, so let's look at the content. Is the content aligned? Well, we said the content was land features of the Earth. So Camilla is activating a switch to listen to a science story about land features. Okay, is the content there? Land features of the Earth. Some of you may say yes, and I could go that way. I don't think it's a very strong alignment, so I went no. I don't know what she's hearing in that story, or if she's going to be able to, it could be, but that's what I could say. It could be. It's a maybe at best. Well, how about the performance? This one's a little clearer. If she's listening to a story, is that the performance that this extended standard requires, which is identify? No, absolutely not, right? So this tells us with this misalignment that this is not, even if Camilla achieves this goal, this short-term objective, she will not have met the extended standard. All right, so let's look at another example. Here's another example. We have the same general education standard. We have the same extended standard, same content, same context, and same performance, but we have a different objective. This teacher has written, after reading a science chapter about land features of the Earth, Camilla will use pictures to identify land features, e.g. mountains, volcanoes, and valleys. All right, so is the context there? Is she in an ELA or science class? Well, it says after reading a science chapter. So I think it's a pretty good bet that she's in science class. That's stronger. How about the content? Are the land features of the Earth featured in this objective? Absolutely, right? She's reading a science chapter about land features. And then how about the performance? Is she able to then identify the land features? Well, yes, she's using pictures to identify land features. So the performance is there. This objective is aligned to that standard, and that's what we want to see in our instruction. Now let's apply what you've learned in this activity. You have downloaded the alignment activity from the Google Doc that you opened at the beginning of this training. You'll have 3 minutes to work individually or with a partner to complete this activity. Please work in a small group. So, let's do it in a small group and not individually. Read the objectives that you have within this activity, and then decide if the context, the content, and the performance criteria are aligned to the extended standard. And circle yes or no to indicate your response. Once everybody's had a moment to finish this activity, you can share your responses with the larger group. Facilitators, please pause the video for this activity. Now let's talk about writing annual goals for the standards-based IEP. You'll first want to identify the priorities from each academic content area. Remember that these annual goals must address each area of need described in the present levels. You'll also, some of these annual goals may link directly to the grade level standard. Others may address multiple standards. All of your annual goals must be observable and measurable statements of performance that can be accomplished in a year. All right, and then the conditions for performing the skill should also be specified, such as adapted text or read-alouds if they are needed in these in the annual goal. Here are some examples that assess academic content standards. This first one is is a demonstration of academic learning using accommodations. So here's the annual goal. Given a communication board with scanning, Laura will use a switch to select correct answers from an array in reading, math, and science classes. Here's another one that focuses on the big ideas of grade level content. When given a writing template, Anna will summarize text from 3 different books by selecting and putting sentences in order. And then lastly, we can build on early literacy and early numeracy skills within the grade level content. So for example, when given a mathematical problem adapted from grade level, George will identify numbers under 10 and solve problems using manipulatives and a picture model. All right, now it's time for you to apply what you've learned in another activity. The annual goal activity should take about 5 minutes. And during this activity, we'd like for you to think about a student in your class with extensive support needs and consider his or her present level in the content area, reading, math, or science, and the extended grade level standards, extended content standards. The link to the North Carolina extended content standards is in the document, in the Google Doc, in this activity. Then write an annual goal for the learner that is observable and measurable, and a statement of performance that can be accomplished in a year. Facilitators, please pause for students to complete this activity. Once you have the annual goals written, you can write the specific short-term objectives, called STOs, or benchmarks. When writing STOs, consider how you will sequence for learning. Write objectives in measurable and observable terms. Consider the condition, behavior, and performance criteria for objectives. And write the STOs in an active response that requires students to respond independently versus a passive response that relies on others. And lastly, plan for generalization. Here's a graphic that describes the relationship between annual goals and objectives. Notice that the annual goal is at the top, and the objectives are the steps to get from where the person is to the annual goal. All objectives must be measurable and observable, and they contain 3 elements: a condition, a behavior, and a criteria for mastery. A condition describes what is in place when the objective is taught and includes a description of the tools and resources available to the learner when performing the behavior or skill, such as, here's a couple of examples. When given adapted grade level science text and a text reader, that's an example of the conditions. Or, here's another one. When given graphic organizers, such as the set maker, pattern maker, manipulatives, and a problem-based math story read aloud. All right, that sets the conditions. You also have a behavior or skill. The behavior describes what the learner will do. The behavior describes one behavior and includes one verb. When writing the behavior, ask yourself if the verb you chose describes the type of behavior that the learner needs to display after teaching. Right? For example, if the annual goal is to describe, but the behavior is identify, then even when the student masters the objective and the behavior doesn't get to the annual goal because the annual goal and the objective aren't aligned. There are also words that show up sometimes in IEP objectives that don't belong, and these are words that aren't measurable. Here's some examples: know, understand, think, reason, and learn. These are words that cannot be observed and therefore really have no place on the annual goal or on the IEP. The performance criteria describes how well the behavior must be performed to meet the goal. It can be how often, such as once a day or 3 out of 5 sessions. It can be how well, with 80% accuracy or 9 out of 10 task analyzed steps, or no more than 1 error. And it can be how much, such as half a block without turning around. All right, here's a template that's been very helpful to me for writing STOs or for writing these learning objectives. You just take that condition, the behavior, and the criteria and plug it into this statement. All right, it's an activity time again. Let's apply what you've learned with this activity. This is the STO activity. It'll be in your Google Doc that you downloaded at the beginning. So open this STO activity. You have 3 minutes to complete this activity. You'll identify the following parts of the STOs or short-term objectives that we've given you. So we want you to identify the condition, the behavior, and the criteria. And then after identifying the STO parts, create one STO or short-term objective for the annual goal you wrote earlier. Facilitators, please pause the video for participants to complete this activity.